So when most people in, say, America or Europe think about the Dragon Boat Festival, I bet the first thing that comes to mind is the racing, right?
Absolutely. You see these incredible boats, everyone paddling in sync, the drumming. It's very visual, very athletic.
Yeah, it looks a lot like maybe a big summer rowing competition or something you'd see universities doing. Energetic?
It definitely has that vibe now. Very exciting to watch, no doubt.
But is that all there is to it? Is it just, a really cool water sport with some dragons painted on the boats?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. That's really just scratching the surface.
Okay.
Underneath all that energy and competition, there's this incredibly deep history. It's tied to a specific person, a really compelling figure, actually, and a whole load of ancient traditions that go way beyond just racing.
Right. And that's exactly what we want to dig into today.
So the mission, really, is to show you that the Dragon Boat Festival is this rich, multifaceted thing. It's about so much more than just the spectacle of the boats.
Okay, let's start with the racing then, since that's what many people know. It is a big deal today. We saw that piece about the Paris women's team even being part of the Olympic torch relay. That shows real international presence.
Definitely. And the passion's there, too.
Okay, so established, it's a modern, competitive, global sport. But the origin, you said it was different.
Completely different. The whole idea of racing boats, or at least paddling them frantically, started with people trying to find Chu Yin's body.
Find his body. He drowned.
He did. He drowned himself tragically. And the story goes, people rushed out in their boats, not just to search for him, but also paddling hard, banging drums.
Quite annoying.
To scare away fish and, well, maybe evil spirits too, to stop them from bothering his body.
So the very first races weren't races at all. They were acts of, mourning.
Yeah.
Remembrance.
Precisely. It started as this urgent search, this attempt to protect someone they revered. The competitive aspect came much, much later.
Okay, we have to talk about Chu Yin then. Because honestly, I think for a lot of our listeners in the West, that name might not ring a bell. Is he like a legend, a mythical hero?
That's a really good question, and it's key. No, he wasn't mythical. Kuai Yuan, or Tu Yin, was a real person.
Right.
A historical figure. Lived over 2,000 years ago during this really turbulent time in China called the Warring States period. He was a poet, but also a high-ranking official, a statesman in the state of Chu-Think, modern-day Hubei and Hunan provinces.
And he's remembered.
Why?
Why? What's his story?
He's known for his intense loyalty, his patriotism, and ultimately his tragic end. Kind of like a character in Game of Thrones or maybe House of Cards, this brilliant, idealistic advisor to the king.
Okay, I get that. Political intrigue.
Exactly. He had this vision that he wanted the different states to ally against the rising power of Qin, which he saw as a major threat.
A smart political move, sounds like.
You'd think so. But you know how politics can be. Jealous officials, rumors, maneuvering behind the scenes.
So it didn't go well for him.
Not at all. He ended up being slandered, losing the king's trust, and eventually exiled. Banished from the court he tried so hard to serve.
That's rough, especially for someone seen as so loyal.
Terribly rough. And even out in exile, he apparently never stopped worrying about his country. He wrote poetry expressing his anguish and concern. Then came the news that Qin had actually conquered his home state of Chu.
Oh, wow. So his worst fears came true.
Completely. And for him, this wasn't just a political defeat. It was like the collapse of everything he believed in, all the values he held dear, that devastation, that despair for his nation. That's what led him to the Miluo River.
And he jumped in.
Yes. On the 5th day of the 5th lunar month, according to tradition. And that act, that specific date, connects everything.
How so?
Well, the boat racing, as we said, the frantic search, but also the food, the zongzi.
The sticky rice dumpling.
Exactly. The story is that people threw zongzi into the river. Why?
To feed him. No, wait. You said to feed the fish.
Yes, to feed the fish and shrimp so they wouldn't eat his body. It's all tied back to protecting him, even after death.
So his suicide wasn't just personal despair, it was tied to the fall of his country.
Very much so. It was a political statement, in a way. A final act of loyalty and lament.
And you mentioned he was a poet. That seems important, too.
Hugely important. He's considered one of China's greatest poets, maybe the first great poet to really write about his personal feelings, his own experiences, his inner turmoil.
For like a pioneer of romantic poetry.
Exactly. He's seen as a foundational figure of Chinese literary romanticism. His most famous work is called Li Sao.
Li Sao. What does that mean?
It translates roughly to the lament or encountering sorrow, captures that sense of grief and separation.
And the poems themselves. Do they tell us more about him?
Oh, definitely. Our sources pulled out some incredible lines like, "The road ahead is long and far-reaching. I will search high and low, never giving up."
Wow, that sounds determined, idealistic.
It really does. Shows his spirit even when things looked bleak. Then there's, "I sigh deeply and wipe away my tears, grieving for how hard life is for the people."
So he cared about ordinary people, not just politics.
Deeply, it seems. He had this real empathy, and this one is powerful. "Even if I die 100 deaths, I won't regret doing what I believe is right."
Okay, that's commitment, unshakable principles.
Absolutely. It speaks volumes about his integrity. And then there's this line, "Everyone else is drunk, only I am sober. The world is dirty, but I stay clean."
Oof, that sounds lonely and maybe a bit proud. Like he felt isolated in his clear-sightedness.
I think that captures it perfectly, that sense of seeing the problems clearly while feeling like others were, oblivious or compromised. It paints such a picture.
So his death really was this final, powerful act of protest from someone who thought deeply about right and wrong.
Yes. And even in exile, remember, he didn't just give up. He kept writing, kept arguing for his ideals, pushing back against appeasement.
Sounds like exile was actually a really creative time for him, despite the hardship.
Paradoxically, yes. Many of his greatest poems come from that period. And his poetry wasn't just like simple complaints. He used these amazing mythical images, fantastical flights of fancy.
Really, to talk about politics.
Yeah. It's described as almost surreal sometimes, using myths and legends to explore very real political frustrations and ideals. Quite ahead of his time.
And then the legend around his death, the boats, the rice, it all kind of seals his importance in culture.
It cements it, absolutely.
It's quite a contrast, isn't it? This poet with this romantic, maybe idealistic soul up against this brutal political reality.
That tension is probably why he still resonates, I think. He feels very human, despite living so long ago.
And it's pretty unique, right, to have an entire festival basically commemorating a poet.
Extremely unique. It speaks to the profound impact he had, not just politically, but culturally and emotionally.